shoot yourself in the
Oh, you could have a bit of a story for your pro. You can make it really funny if you thought about it.
I've never had a thought in my entire life, so it's simply impossible.
Hello and welcome to the December edition of the Influential Times. Delighted to be joined by Jack, as always.
Cheers, everyone.
Nice to be here in person again. Haven't been sent home yet, which is good. So our first sort of news section this week, we're going to do it in sections this week, is about some executive changes. The first being Twitter. We love talking about Twitter, obviously, don't we, Jack? Jack Dorsey has stepped down as CEO of Twitter, and Parag Agarwal is going to take over. It's quite a good story, actually. He was a developer at Twitter, has worked his way up the ranks. I think he started in 2011, so only 10 years ago, and became the CTO, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and now will take over as CEO. Jack Dorsey has spoken very highly of Parag, so he's clearly very capable in taking the reins. There was talk about whether Jack Dorsey would sit on the board, but he's actually going to completely step away. Possibly a good thing. He'll kind of, won't be influencing decisions, much like other leaders like Jeff Bezos, who obviously stepped down, I think, earlier this year. So yeah, bit of news there. It'll be interesting to see what Jack does now. Possibly something to do with Bitcoin. He talks a lot about Bitcoin. He was quoted saying that it will help to create world peace. So who knows? Maybe he'll get involved in Bitcoin in some way. I think that leads nicely on to another exec change, Jack, at Facebook.
Yeah, so it's an interesting, the contrast with Jack stepping down at Twitter. You could contrast that quite unfavourably with sort of the gradual changeover almost at Facebook or Meta or whichever, however you prefer to call it, if you're old school. You can see sort of Zuckerberg has gone from being having a much better public reputation, Twitter generally being seen as kind of the place where bad things happen online. And there's kind of been a crossover point maybe in the last 3-4 years where now Facebook is broadly seen as the bad guy. It's where bad things happen. It's where people get radicalized. It's, a place where we sort of become more divided, while Twitter's kind of made a lot of those moves. And a lot of the testimony that's come out, that we discussed last week, talks about sort of almost over-centralization of the decision-making process in Mark Zuckerberg's office. I thought it was interesting that Jack Dorsey seemed to, maybe it was pointed, maybe it wasn't, just kind of make a point of saying it's good for companies to be able to move beyond their founders. Yeah. When you think of,
absolutely,
companies that are really long-lasting, beyond just 10, 15 years, I suppose being CEO of, one of the 40 biggest companies on earth is probably a bit like being prime minister or something. It ages you, and there's, that it's a good idea for there to be term limits. Your decision-making power runs out. So an interesting one. Over at Facebook, their crypto unit, Novi, has just lost its current head, a chap called David Marcus, who's been running that. He's hinted he's going to go and maybe sort of run his own venture or get involved in his own sort of crypto venture. So it's not really taken off the sort of Facebook crypto venture so far. We'll see. I think the current head of product there is going to take over and move it forward. But sort of Facebook just continues to kind of, feels like the blows are just sort of raining down a little bit on them at the minute, and we'll see how they do. Speaking of blows raining down on Facebook, that takes us to a sort of the next section, thinking about regulation, sort of online harms, moderation, and that sort of area of social. Facebook has actually been ordered this month by the UK regulator to sell Giphy, basically reverse its acquisition of Giphy. Another sort of, since, Elizabeth Warren during her presidential campaign a couple of years ago said Facebook needed breaking up, among others. Another sign that there's a kind of growing unease among legislators all over the world about the sort of size of Meta as a group, and they've been ordered to sell Giphy. But there's a few other interesting stories in that space around downvoting, Tom. You wanted to
Yeah,
talk us through those.
yeah, definitely. So again, back to Twitter, they are beta testing downvoting. So whereas now you can obviously like tweets and like replies, you'll also be able to kind of downvote them. They've said this isn't serving a purpose of necessarily ranking in individual replies. So it's not to say on this individual post, this particular reply wasn't very popular and then we'll downrank it. It's actually more of a longer term approach to look at the types of posts that are popular. So an example could be if a post is getting lots of one-word replies and people are downvoting that, then it's the kind of the nature of the replies, the type of content that people like. So it's kind of training the algorithm over time, and I guess should be a good thing over time in that it will present you replies that people generally prefer, and it will help the algorithm to learn that over time.
Guess they're taking their cue from TikTok a little bit as well. That very responsive, that ability to just swipe something away.
Yeah.
If you're sort of not entertained by it within a few seconds. So.
Exactly. And the key thing with it is, well, at the moment anyway, is that they won't be visible necessarily. So you'll still only be able to see likes. So it's not like someone's going to get barraged with loads of downvoting, and obviously could cause further issues. On the other hand, YouTube are also looking at downvoting. They've actually had quite a negative reaction to this. Ironically, they did an announcement video to announce the downvoting, that they're beta testing downvoting, and it had 53 dislikes on the video. They already have downvoting, I think, in place. But yeah, it hasn't had a very good reaction. And the idea of it is to stop trolling, to stop people. There's these groups that kind of just go in and just all kind of downvote on particular creator videos. And it's to kind of try and stop that from happening. The kind of loophole with it is that the creators can still see the downvotes, just that the public can't. So you could argue that it isn't actually solving the problem. There's also an argument that downvoting is actually quite a useful feature on YouTube, because there's obviously a lot of clickbait, like people put really catchy titles to make you watch the video, but obviously if it's not particularly useful or isn't actually relevant to what the title is about, then it's harder to spot that, and you could waste your time watching videos that aren't very relevant.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny to see sort of Twitter entering at one end of it, right at the beginning of having a dislike or downvote, and like YouTube have come out the other side of having it, and are sort of deciding that actually the best thing is to start hiding that. Comes back to the sort of one of the tricky questions in all of online moderation and a lot of this stuff is that kind of one man's useful feedback / review is another's kind of angry mob, and the exact same action will have different kind of weight depending on whether you're on the receiving end of it or whether you could post a crap video that is just clickbait and it still probably isn't going to be very good for your mental health if a bunch of people downvote it, even if you should stop. And that's a sort of tricky, rights versus responsibilities thing. On a similar note, Twitter have also kind of strengthen their bans on people posting images of other people without their consent. So kind of making sure that sort of doxing or sort of exposing behaviour is something that users are sort of more easily able to quickly respond to, and they're sort of strengthening their policies to make sure that if someone is posting images of you without asking, then you can sort of quickly do it, and the rules will be on your side.
I think there were some early concerns around, how would it apply to like sporting events, for example? Like if you post a picture at a football match and you've got like thousands of people in the photo, it's not going to apply to those situations.
Yeah,
it's more for obviously like harassment and bullying and things like that. I think my question would be, how's it going to be policed? I think if you've got like different sort of rules for different types of images, then it could get a bit messy in how they police it.
Yeah.
And there's obviously question marks already about how certain content is policed, and clearly a lot of stuff gets through which shouldn't be seen. So I think that's probably going to be the issue that comes out of that, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I think all the big platforms are going to have to keep wrestling with this and keep putting. I think you're always going to be able to get a certain distance with the sort of automated stuff, but with all the tricky cases, you do end up having to refer it to a person, and that comes down to sort of properly staffing the moderation department. So the kind of next story I wanted to talk about in the next section was thinking a little bit more about video content, and it leads on nicely from that. Patreon have announced that they are building a video product, and it's largely off the back of the fact that they have a lot of YouTube creators on their platform, and a lot of them are dissatisfied with the way that YouTube manages these things. Had lots of incidents of, like you say, the kind of harassment, people sort of going around in an online mob, if that's the terminology you like to use, disliking things en masse. We've had videos being flagged as inappropriate or 18 plus, just because they sort of are, discussing LGBT rights or something like that. So there's kind of lots of issues with the moderation, and those tricky cases being quite hard to adjudicate. So sort of Patreon have decided, well, I fancy a bit of that action, and they're hoping they're going to be able to build something themselves. But be interesting to see how, in 2 years, how creators feel about that, because I suspect Patreon will find themselves back with a lot of the same problems. I suppose their one bit of salvation is going to be is that maybe it being a little more gated and people paying kind of $15 a month, they're less likely to show up just to cause trouble.
Yeah, it's much more of a community, a membership kind of feel to it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on to some other news around video. Instagram have, as part of the, I think Zuckerberg announced that they were going to be putting $1 billion towards creators on their different platforms. Instagram being one of those. They are offering up to $35,000 to creators to use Reels. So Reels is a kind of rival feature to TikTok, but obviously TikTok have been growing so rapidly. Facebook are trying to keep up. I think TikTok said they've got 1 billion monthly active users now, which is pretty staggering. In a bid to keep up with that, they are offering creators monetary incentives to create video content, fees ranging from $1,000 up to $35,000, depending on how many views they get. An interesting tactic to try and sort of steal people away from TikTok, Jack.
Yeah, it feels like it's been going around a year or more now, this kind of war to just, I hesitate to use the word bribe, but it is almost bribe, as many creators as possible. I still find most of the time when I interact with Reels in my real life, it's a lot of it is just very clearly a TikTok that I saw about 3 weeks previously, and someone's just downloaded it and sort of uploaded it to Reels, but I guess they want people using it as a platform first. I get plenty of notifications telling me that someone has posted a Reel. I don't think I've actually watched one of those from the notification yet, but I understand Instagram has users other than myself, so see how they go and how long they're able to kind of sustain the financial hit of paying people to use the app.
Also for audio as well, Facebook as well. So it leads us on to our favourite topic of social audio.
Yes.
Facebook paying creators to use their live. I think it's called live audio rooms. Is it?
Yeah. I'm not even sure. I remember hearing a few months ago that they were developing some sort of live audio feature. I think they're thinking musicians as well as kind of just speakers, which I think makes sense given Spotify have been thinking about that. I think it was called Green Room or something like that was Spotify's solution. So another busy month in social audio overall, hasn't it? Spotify acquired an audiobook company called Findaway for an undisclosed amount of money, which leads me to think, congratulations to the founders or owners of Findaway. Clubhouse says that they're still standing. They had a little niche celebrity you might have heard of by the name of Oprah on their platform, and they say that room had 40,000,
which isn't
40,000
that
listeners.
Impressive, really, is it? I mean,
for Oprah,
it was. They were discussing the Adele interview, right? And I think the Adele interview got 10 million people watching it on TV. So it kind of just goes to show how far behind, I guess, audio is to things like TV.
Yeah, I suppose the sort of interesting question, if you're an advertiser or a marketer in terms of these, is how closely does one hold your attention versus the other? Do people double screen when they're watching TV? Are they actually scrolling Twitter when something's on TV? So maybe there's a little bit of a gap in terms of Whereas if you listen to a live audio, maybe you're more engaged.
Yeah.
I tend to say, personally, when I listen to a podcast, I don't know about you, I'm usually like doing something else.
Yeah. Definitely.
Usually doing the washing up or hoovering or something like that. So I don't know if my attention is held that closely. Yeah. Either.
Yeah. And then I guess a final story, really. Dating apps now getting on board with audio as well. So Hinge have launched audio in the way that people write prompts and things about themselves. They can now do that as an audio feature. I think the uptake we looked at, Jack, was it 17% of people have posted an audio prompt and 46% of people have listened to one. So it seems like people are a little bit shy perhaps to post them, but definitely listening to them. So interesting that, I guess dating sites are also getting involved in that, and it's becoming a key feature.
Yeah, interesting. It's not quite live audio, is it? Because it's asynchronous, but in the same way people use it on something like WhatsApp, you kind of send an audio note sometimes. It's kind of, well, I guess if I released a feature and nearly half of my users were using it, that'd be a pretty good sign. So a positive note to end on for the world of audio. That is all we have this week. Look out for the email newsletter. We'll go into a little bit more detail on 5 of those stories. And next time we see you, it will be 2022. So very happy holiday season to everyone at home, and we will see you in the new year.